Hello and welcome to Nightmare Masterclass. My name is David Stockdale. I'll be your host on this excursion into the dark unknown. Hope everyone's doing well. This was originally intended to be a Patreon exclusive, but I'm releasing the video to the public for a number of reasons. To give you some context, Red Letter Media recently did a video discussing Chris Stuckmann's Shelby Oaks, and I'll be honest, I thought they were a little harsh on the director in a way that didn't totally make sense to me. Most of what they focused on was the marketing machine around the film and not the movie itself, and it kind of felt like they hadn't even fully engaged with what was actually on screen. It didn't even seem like they watched the movie. This video is going to be critical of Shelby Oaks, but my goal is different. I've been watching Stuckmann for over a decade. I like the guy, and I think his story is genuinely compelling. I'm interested in what went wrong with this film on a thematic and structural level, and how some of the pressure he's under might be shaping his work. So this isn't a pile-on, and it's not a takedown. It is a good faith critique from someone who is rooting for Stuckmann and trying to figure out why this movie ends up feeling so middling despite some strong moments and a very promising setup. I don't really care about the marketing discourse. I care about why the film feels thematically fuzzy, why the protagonist doesn't quite register as a person, and why the horror never really connects to anything deeper. That's the level I'm interested in. So if you're interested, stay tuned. If you want to support this channel, you can go to patreon.com/Nightmare Masterclass and sign up for as little as $1 a month. I recently did a review of Begonia, so you can check that out. And in other news, I am working on a longer video essay right now. The plan is currently to have that up by the end of the month. We'll see how that goes. Without further ado, enjoy this film review, and apologies for any audio troubles.
I wanted to talk about Shelby Oaks, Chris Stuckmann's movie. I saw it last Friday, and I have some thoughts. I want to discuss it, because I did cover the web series that leads up to this movie on my channel. So if you haven't seen that video, I'll include a link to it in the description for this one. I think the title is What Happened to the Paranormal Paranoids. So Stuckmann is an interesting guy. He, like I said, he created a web series that leads up to this movie, almost kind of like I guess a prequel series, and it's mostly almost kind of like a found footage type thing. The movie, conversely, is more of a straightforward horror movie. And let me just talk about the background a little bit, because just to give you some context, Chris Stuckmann, if you're not aware, is a YouTuber he is a film critic. He reviews movies on his channel. He is, I would say, probably one of the most successful YouTube film critics that there is. I can only really name a few off the top of my head, but very interesting move now. He is sort of pivoting to be a film director, which more power to him. I think that's awesome. I have been watching Stuckmann's film reviews for a long time, over a decade, I would say, at this point. So this is just a little disclaimer to say that it's impossible for me to be unbiased in this film review, because I have been watching Stuckmann's videos for a very long time, and I generally appreciate his perspective on movies. I like his positivity. I like his passion for independent film in general. And I have my qualms with some of his opinions or the way he approaches things sometimes, but in general, I really like him. So I am partial to Chris Stuckmann as a person, and I think it's going to be impossible for me to be totally unbiased here. I'm rooting for the guy. I want him to be successful. Let's talk about the movie. Before we get into spoilers, I will say right off the bat that, look, if you are looking for a fun horror movie to watch in the spooky season, I would recommend Shelby Oaks. And I will say, in particular, about to get hit by a car here, in particular, I would say the last quarter of the movie, maybe the final act of the movie, if we're putting it in screenwriting terms, the last act of the movie is the best part of it. It was an entertaining horror film, and I had a fun time. I'll be getting into spoilers from here on out, so if you want to watch the movie, you should probably stop the video here, and I'm getting into spoilers. So where do I begin? I think so. I'll say I want to start with the positives. I think all of the scenes with the old lady are really well done and quite effective in terms of achieving that creepy effect of, like, what is this old lady gonna do? What's going on here in this house? That's why I say that the final act of the movie is pretty good. It's quite effective. Overall, though, if you had a gun to my head, I would say this movie is mids. It's an entertaining horror movie. It doesn't quite reach the level of other horror films that I really appreciate, but at the same time, as far as like a debut film, it is passable, and I really want to see where Stuckmann goes next with his movies, because I think he has a lot of potential. And so everything I'm going to say now, I'm going to try to be constructive with my criticism. I'm going to try to be all of this is in good faith. I'm rooting for the guy. I want to see what he does next. There may be a bit of a parasocial element here because I've seen so many of his film reviews that I feel like I kind of understand his perspective on movies. And I think like I said, I have some qualms with maybe a few opinions he has here and there, but overall, I generally agree with him on most things. But let's talk about maybe where there's some disagreement. So a while back, when Stuckmann started pivoting to being a filmmaker, I think he's dealing with a problem, a fundamental problem, which is that he really needs his YouTube channel to sustain his business, and he needs to keep producing film reviews, right? So that's the economics of that are totally understandable, right? This is like for a long time, I believe, being a full-time film reviewer, that's his job, and that's his YouTube channel is the way he supports himself and his family, which is great. It's great that he's able to do that. Now that he is pursuing his passion of being a film director, that's what he wanted to do all along, right? He's stated this multiple times that being a film director is kind of his dream job, which is cool. A while back, he said, well, I'm not going to do any negative reviews anymore because I guess there are probably multiple reasons for that, but I think the foremost reason is that he doesn't want to alienate anybody that he might potentially work with in the future. So on a practical level, I totally understand that. At the same time, I'm thinking to myself when he made this announcement, he's in a tough spot here. This is not something I would do. If I have something negative to say about a work of art, I'm going to say it, and maybe it's just a personality thing. I'm not going to censor myself due to the possibility that I might alienate somebody and lose an opportunity in the future. And I mean, look, it's his channel. He can do what he wants, right? Broader point I'm trying to make here is that I think this is a fundamental problem he's going to have to deal with because, unfortunately, we live in a a media ecosystem where these sort of negative reviews that he used to do, he used to go on these little rants that are really quite entertaining, and I would often agree with him. He used to go on these little rants about his problem with the way the film industry is going, or like the overuse of jump scares or things like that, you know? And if a movie came out and it was absolutely terrible, he would review it and he would pick it apart and destroy it, right? And so he stopped doing that, and he's only going to talk about he's only going to talk about movies that he really enjoys moving forward, or things that he feels positive about. All of that is totally understandable. But I think it's a symptom of a bigger issue for him, which is that he's maybe a bit conflict averse and maybe a bit repressed. So I am being an armchair psychoanalyst here. So feel free to disregard this because it's total speculation on my part. But knowing what I know about Stuckmann, I can't help but to think that repression is maybe his weak point, and it comes out in his films. Or at least that was my impression when I watched Shelby Oaks. And I'll explain what I mean. I'll go into depth on that. But for a bit more context, I should note that Stuckmann grew up as a Jehovah's Witness. He's been very open about this. And if you're not familiar with the Jehovah's Witnesses, they have kind of the stereotype is that they go door to door and try to convert people, right? Now, I guess what I want to say, look, Stuckmann was a Jehovah's Witness and grew up in that setting. He has talked about it a little bit on his channel. So I would encourage you, if you're curious about this, to go listen to his perspective on it. But the thing about Jehovah's Witnesses, and I'm not trying to single them out, there are actually a lot of religious organizations like this. The thing about them is they're really quite insular. And I get the sense that Stuckmann was maybe a little bit sheltered from outside perspectives when he was a kid. And that's not his fault. I would say that religions that do this to kids, I think the overarching goal, and it's pretty similar to cults, the overarching goal is you have a sort of close-knit community, but at the same time, if you no longer want to practice that religion, you are cut off from that entire community, right? And that is truly, truly abusive. And it sort of creates a cult mentality. Again, he's talked openly about this, and none of that is his fault. My understanding, if I remember correctly, he was cut off from his family for a period of time because he wanted to be a filmmaker. And the guidance he was given within his religious community, the leaders of that community basically told him, you're going against the word of God by doing that. I don't know if they have an issue with just filmmakers in general, or if they have an issue with perhaps what he wanted to focus on, which is horror movies, right? But this is a very common belief among ultra-Christian organizations, and I dealt with this a bit myself growing up, though, but it was not anywhere near as extreme. Like, my mom wouldn't let me wear black t-shirts because she thought that would be kind of like an entry point for devil worship, So all of this is a pretty long-winded way of saying that's Stuckmann's background, and he grew up in the Jehovah's Witnesses, and thankfully he found the courage to leave that organization despite the fact that he became totally isolated from his family to some degree, if I remember correctly, and became a successful film critic, and now it appears he may be a successful film director. I think what I see in Chris, when he says things like, I'm not going to do like negative film reviews anymore, and sometimes it even sort of comes out in his film reviews, is that he is maybe a bit afraid to dance with the devil, if that makes sense, and confront certain negative emotions that he has. And I think that's actually necessary in order to make a good horror film, in order to write a good horror film, and in order to direct a good horror film. I think you kind of need to confront your demons, as it were. So I'll try to be more specific, and I'll try to keep it focused on the movie now, because it is a case where I think the film suffers from multiple problems, but the biggest one, in my opinion, is that, and I'm gonna be blunt here. I'm trying to find a nice way to say this, but there really is no nice way to say it. I don't think Stuckmann really knows what this movie is about. In other words, the more like professional way to say this would be, the film lacks thematic cohesion. There is a sort of a nod to some kind of overarching theme, but it is not thoroughly explored, and it is not fleshed out to a degree that would make the film interesting. And I'll explain what I mean. So the protagonist is the sister of Riley, Riley is the host of this YouTube group called the Paranormal Paranoids. They go out and investigate hauntings and whatnot. And Riley and this group have disappeared. So the protagonist is Riley's sister. I forget her name, but her whole deal is basically that she's married. She and her husband wanted to have a kid, but because Riley went missing, that sort of compassed all of her life. And they really haven't had a chance to have a kid. And now it's sort of creating a bit of tension in the relationship. But the protagonist is sort of consumed by this mystery of what happened to her sister, which is understandable, right? I'm kind of reminded of Fox Mulder, right? Fox Mulder from the X-Files, who is consumed in the first few seasons with what happened to his sister, who he suspects was abducted by aliens or something. Now, the thing is, when I say the film, like, there's not enough thematic cohesion, I guess what I'm really saying is that this whole thing about wanting to have kids, the protagonist wants to have kids, this ends up being, I think, kind of an important detail, because as it turns out, Riley has been kidnapped by this creepy guy and this old woman, and they're keeping her hostage and sort of forcing her to be a part of this ritual where she gives birth, she is impregnated and gives birth to, I don't know exactly, it's not really spelled out in the movie, but some kind of demonic baby, right? And so it's sort of insinuated that, like, obviously she's being held against her will, and perhaps this ritual, they've attempted this ritual multiple times, and they have failed multiple times, perhaps because they're performing the ritual wrong, perhaps because she's having miscarriages. It's not entirely clear. But you see a few pictures to sort of give you the impression of what's going on here. And that's all well and good, right? Like, I think this basic plot is workable, potentially. Where it misses the mark for me is maybe in the execution and the writing. The protagonist doesn't feel like a fully fleshed out person. It feels like she solely exists simply as a sort of plot device to figure out what happened to Riley. It doesn't feel like the protagonist is her own person. It seems like this is a divergence from the web series, the Paranormal Paranoids. I felt that the web series was very well done. And if the film had perhaps been a bit more like that, it would have been more effective. There may be some reason he decided not to go that route. Maybe he wanted to avoid doing a found footage movie because I don't know exactly. Maybe if it was me, I might be a little bit worried that if I was to do a found footage movie, that it would be the criticism would be that, oh, this is derivative. We've seen this before, and I think that's a legitimate concern. If you're gonna do a found footage movie, you really have to figure out a way to make it interesting and not just repeat the same tropes that we've seen before. So that's a real challenge. When it comes to Shelby Oaks, so the web series, Paranormal Paranoids, was very well done, and I feel like the protagonist of that series, Riley, was actually pretty well fleshed out when you consider the fact that it's only a small handful of short videos. I said that the protagonist of Shelby Oaks, however, feels a bit one-note, feels a bit one-dimensional. I think it all comes back to this lack of thematic cohesion, right? Because, so as it turns out, Riley is forced to have this baby. The protagonist then finds her sister, rescues her, but, I suppose it's insinuated that this baby is demonic. And the way that's telegraphed to the audience is that the baby has dogs protecting him, right? So I guess it's kind of a nod to The Omen, right? In The Omen, Damien has his big guard dog that protects him, this like demon from hell, the guard dog. Anyway, I found that to be a little bit derivative. I think when we talk about this issue of thematic cohesion, I will, to be fair, I will say that I think I understand what the filmmaker was going for, right? Because at the end of the movie, and so this is a major spoiler, at the end of the movie, Riley sort of comes to her senses and maybe begins to suspect that this baby is evil. And really, she should do something about it. She should, basically kill the baby and prevent this evil from coming into the world. Her sister sees what Riley's about to do and stops it from happening. But in the process, Riley falls out the window and is eaten by a bunch of dogs. And then it's revealed that this demon, I think it's in the movie, they explain this demon is an incubus. It's revealed that this demon now basically has the protagonist under his control. And as it turns out, the protagonist got what she wanted all along, which is a baby to raise, right? What it all comes down to is I feel that this was not earned. I think that the filmmaker, I think Stuckmann, because he wrote and directed this movie. And that is really, look, this is not an easy thing to do. I don't believe that he did enough to really establish the protagonist as her own person. Why does she want to have a baby? Why is she married to this guy? What does she even do for a living? None of this is explained. How do they afford this big, beautiful house that they live in? None of that is explained. Not that you need to front load us with exposition about all that stuff, but these details need to be addressed in the writing process in order for this character to feel fully fleshed out. Part of me wants to say that, look, what is this film about really? We can talk about how people are not having kids at the rate they used to have them. And there are a lot of reasons for that. There are a lot of socioeconomic reasons. And I think the film doesn't really contend with that. Not necessarily that it has to, but then I come back to the question, what's the film about then? What is this film about? What is the fundamental theme? I can think of movies that I love and I can articulate what they're about. Hereditary is about family trauma. It's about the idea of your family feeling cursed in some way. And the film sort of explores that in abstract terms, using a demon as a sort of metaphor. I'm not saying you have to repeat that formula. I'm saying your film has to be about something. So is the demon in Shelby Oaks just a demon? Or does it represent something? And after having seen the film, I'm really just coming to the conclusion that it's just a demon. Like, there's no real social commentary here. It is just a scary demon. And that's why I say this movie is an entertaining horror movie. And there's this term that people throw around, and I've criticized it a lot, which is elevated horror, right? I'm not saying every horror movie has to be like that. I'm not saying every horror movie has to be some contemplative, metaphoric journey about the nature of trauma. That's not what I'm saying. I am saying your film has to be about something in order for me to truly appreciate it. And again, to be fair, there's a sort of nod to this movie being about this, I guess, be careful what you wish for type situation where the protagonist wants a baby, and by the end of the movie she is raising a baby, but it's on behalf of this demon, right? So I did all this psychoanalyzing of poor Chris at the beginning of this review, but I want to circle back to that and say I know his childhood was not easy, and perhaps I'm certainly not suggesting that he needs to make a movie about his experiences. I think that might be a bit too on the nose, right? What I am saying is, I think in order to be an effective filmmaker, especially when it comes to the horror genre, you have to really explore what scares you, what makes you afraid. And so that's sort of a long-winded way of saying that I think I'm excited to see what Stuckmann does next, but I kind of hope he does a bit of soul-searching. And I kind of hope that he entertains the possibility of potentially offending people. Sometimes you need to do that in order to make an effective movie. I think he might be a little bit too afraid to offend anybody. And I honestly, I think that might be what distinguishes mediocre filmmakers from great filmmakers, is that great filmmakers just kind of go for it. It's not that they're going out of their way to try and offend people. It's more so that they've confronted something that really troubles them, and they want to achieve that effect on the audience, if that makes sense. And in order to do that, oftentimes you have to confront some really troublesome, disturbing topics. So, like, I keep coming back to Ari Aster. And if you look at his filmography, you'll see that he's not afraid to go there. He's not afraid to really touch upon some really controversial and disturbing topics in his movies. And there are plenty of instances of this, right? I think if Stuckmann wants to transcend his current limitations, he needs to confront his demons and, like I said, do a bit of soul searching about, well, what's your next film going to be about? What's it really going to be about? What scares you? What scares you, and how are you going to scare the audience? That's assuming he makes a horror movie. It seems like that might be the niche that he wants to cultivate here. I know that he had Mike Flanagan's help with this movie. The other criticisms I have of the movie are just kind of almost procedural. Like, I think there is a tonal shift in the movie that is strange and unnecessary. So the first 5 minutes or so, basically the introduction in the movie, is has this sort of mockumentary format. My note would be all of that is unnecessary. You can figure out a more organic way to explain what you need to explain in the dialogue. The mockumentary aspect of the movie felt inauthentic. It felt fake. It felt like a mockumentary. I think you could cut all that stuff out. And I mean, like, yeah, like there's like 5 minutes or so of this sort of mockumentary type material where the protagonist is explaining what happened to her sister. There's a scene where a guy comes to the door and shoots himself in the head. I think you just start the movie like that. That's such a jarring and provocative way to start the movie that just start it like that, because then you're really drawing people in with the mystery. I'm really rooting for Stuckmann as a filmmaker. I think it's part of an interesting trend, for sure, of YouTubers going on to have successful film careers. There are a few other instances of this that's starting to be a trend. So, I mean, the film industry itself certainly needs some reinvention and some reinvigorating, so I'm all for it. And I guess I'll leave things there. So if you've watched me this far, if you've seen Shelby Oaks, let me know what you think. I haven't really watched any other film reviews of the movie. I don't really know how it's being received. So, but anyway, yeah, let me know what you think. And I don't know, maybe I'm doing a bit too much psychoanalyzing. I can't help but to psychoanalyze a little bit because I've been watching his channel for so long. But maybe that's kind of a mistake. I'm not sure. Anyway, take care of yourself, and I'll see you in the next one.